Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. We'll be taking a look at the first half of the 5.7 banners today. The first character we're going to be taking a look at is going to be Skirk, and the other character sharing a banner with her is going to be Shenhe. Let's go through both of these banners and see whether or not these characters are a good pulling option for you. Now, onto the video. So the first character we're going to be talking about is going to be Skirk. Looking at Skirk, she's going to be a cryo character using her sword to actually do her damage, and then she's going to ascend into crit damage, which is going to help out considering later on we'll talk about this, but her weapon goes into crit rate, balancing out that crit ratio for you. Looking at her skills, her normal attack has really nothing for it, so let's go ahead and talk about her skill. Her skill states in Havoc Warp that it imitates the combat style of the Foul. This produces different effects depending on whether you tap or hold the skill. Looking at the tap version, it states that Skirk gains 45 Serpent Subtlety and switches to the 7-phase flash mode. Looking at the hold version, it states that Skirk gains 45 Serpent Subtlety and will continuously move at high speed, with her interruption resistance being increased in this state. During this time, Skirk can control her movement direction and move atop water. That she can also use this skill again to end rapid movement prematurely. This has its own separate modifiers, so actually using your 7-phase flash mode has its separate modifiers than doing the normal attack, so actually for most of your damage, you're going to want to focus in leveling this skill to get more damage during this special phase where most of her damage comes from. Talking about most of her damage as well, let's go ahead and look at her burst, Havoc Ruin. Havoc Ruin states that Skirk's elemental burst is not reliant on elemental energy, but is instead based on her Serpent Subtlety that she gets. When Skirk has at least 50 Serpent Subtlety, she can expend all of her Serpent Subtlety stacks to unleash her elemental burst, ripping the space before her apart and using rapid consecutive slashes that deal AoE cryo damage. At the same time, the damage dealt by an instance of this elemental burst will be increased by every single point of Serpent Subtlety over the amount of 50 when it is unleashed. You can have up to 12 points to be counted for this purpose. So what this means is you can have 62 maximum points to use for the burst. Now this does not look like it has an actual maximum amount of points that you can hold because there's a lot of other ways to get more points. It just means that you can use up to 12 over the 50 to use to get an extra damage bonus. When Skirk is in the 7-phase flash mode, Havoc Ruin will be replaced instead with the Havoc Extinction. So if you use your burst while you are inside of your skill state, this is going to change to Havoc Extinction. This special elemental burst can be used even without consuming Serpent Subtlety stacks. After using it, Skirk will gain the All Shall Wither effect, which will last until the 7-phase flash mode ends. After unlocking the passive talent Reason Beyond Reason, she can also absorb nearby Void Rifts. While All Shall Wither effect is active every 0.1 seconds after Skirk's normal attack hits an opponent, that normal attack damage will be increased. If she absorbed any Void Rifts while using Havoc Extinction, this normal attack's damage will be further increased based on the number of rifts absorbed. This effect can be cancelled when it has triggered 10 specific times. And you can see down at the bottom with the attributes how much that attack percentage is going to be helping with the Serpent Subtlety stacks over the amount of 50. Remember, you can have a maximum of 12. And then also the absorption damage bonus when you have your Void Rifts is also shown in the skill attributes as well, with a cooldown of 15 seconds for the burst. Now looking at the passives, she has very good different passives all across the board, but the main one I want to talk about is Reason Beyond Reason. That one that was mentioned in her special elemental burst. It states that when nearby party members trigger frozen, superconduct, cryo swirl, cryo crystallize reactions against specific opponents, a void rift will be created near that opponent. This effect can be triggered once every 2.5 seconds, and 3 void rifts can be created by Skirk herself at any one time. Skirk can use the following methods to absorb nearby void rifts. The first is when she hits an opponent with a charge attack in her 7-phase flash mode, and the second is when she uses the special elemental burst, Havoc Extinction, while she's in the 7-phase flash mode. And the third is when she holds her elemental skill, Havoc Warp, to engage in rapid movement. Each rift that you absorbed will be giving you 8 Serpent Subtlety points, which is how you're going to get over the initial 50 by getting 45 from her skill.
Do those in-game prices have you down? Well, don't worry, Lootbar has your back. Lootbar is the go-to top-up service for many gamers around the world. You can enjoy instant delivery within just minutes of your purchase, if not even seconds, a secure transaction which is 100% safe, and part of that is because they don't require emails or passwords. All they need for, let's just say, Genshin Impact is your UID. And they don't just cover Genshin Impact, but many other games, as you can see here on my screen. You can do Honkai Star Rail, Zenless Zone Zero, Wuthering Waves, and just many other games. And the best part of all this is that new users get 10% off their first purchase. Click the link down in the description or pinned comment to start saving today. Now, let's get back to the content. Now let's take a quick look at the other character on the other side of the banner, Shenhe, finally getting one of her reruns, which is joked about for a long time. Now, besides her Liyue Chronicled Wish show up, this is actually one of her first or second reruns in a very, very long time. So let's look at her kit. Looking at her Ascension, she does ascend into attack percent, which is going to be great for reasons we'll talk about here later on in her kit. But basically, in a nutshell, she uses her attack to buff other characters' damage. Looking at her skill, this is called Spring Spirit Summoning, and you will grant all nearby party members the Icy Cool effect and deal some cryo damage in different ways based on whether you tap the skill or hold it. Now, when you tap the skill, you're just going to deal some cryo damage. When you hold the skill, you're going to deal AoE cryo damage. But looking more specifically at Icy Quill effect that you're giving when you use the skill, this states that when normal charged plunging attacks, elemental skills, and elemental bursts deal cryo damage specifically to opponents, the damage dealt is increased based on Shenhe's current attack. The Icy Quill's effects will be cleared once its duration ends or after being triggered a certain number of times. So this is something you have to keep in mind, and that's that this Icy Quill buff has a quota. Now, if you tap the skill, it's going to have a quota of 5, and if you hold the skill, it's going to have a quota of 7. When one cryo damage instance strikes multiple opponents, from the character you're buffing with Shenhe that is, the effect is triggered multiple times based on the number of opponents hit. So if, let's say, you buff your Ayaka with your Shenhe skill, and you hit 3 Hilichurls, you actually have just used 3 of your 5 or 7 quota from the skill. So that is something to keep in mind, and thus does make this a little bit more valuable, maybe if you're doing single target damage or just boss rushes, something like that. But either way, just keep that in mind. The number of times the effect is triggered is calculated independently for each party member with the Icy Quill. So Escoffier and Skirk, let's say if you're using Shenhe in that team, they will both be buffed independently and trigger the quota independently, which is nice. Looking at Shenhe's burst, this is called Divine Maiden's Deliverance. She's going to unleash the power of the Talisman Spirit and deal some AoE cryo damage, but then also create a field that decreases the cryo resistance and physical resistance of opponents within it. It will also deal periodic cryo damage to opponents within the field. So the biggest takeaway here is that you're decreasing the cryo and physical resistance of the opponent while also dealing a little bit of damage over time. Now, looking at her passives, her first passive is just stating that an active character within the field created by the burst will gain an additional 15% cryo damage bonus on top of the resistance that the burst already provides. And looking at her second passive talent, after Shenhe uses her skill, she's going to grant all nearby party members the following effects. Now, the first effect will specifically give skill and burst damage increase when you tap the skill, and that increase is 15% for a duration of 10 seconds. But if you hold the skill, then you're buffing normal, charged, and plunging attack damage by 15% for 15 seconds. So this is where it doesn't matter how you use Shenhe's skill based on the team you're running in. If your character does, let's say, normal attack damage for the most part, then you want to make sure you're holding the skill so you're buffing normal attack damage. But if your character does primarily skill or burst damage, then you do want to tap the skill so that you're giving them that corresponding buff.
Now we're going to be taking a look now at our summary section, looking at different questions that need to be kind of answered when we look at specific banners. The first question, as always, is do you actually need either character on your account? So obviously looking first at Skirk, very quickly as a character, we saw cryo damage dealer, that's what we focus on, right? So now we have to think about value specifically. Now I know she's going to be one of the best DPS, but as a lot of people have said before, and specifically I'm going to be stealing this from someone, I Win to Lose Gaming kind of put it in a very good way. The feeling that Skirk is she is the most restrictive, flexible character ever. And that's going to be more explained when we talk about the team section, but really in general, that's kind of what she is. She has a very specific desire for specific teammates, but at the same time, she can also be pretty flexible in those aspects as well. As you saw with kind of how she works, she wants kind of one specific team and works that way. So it's very difficult to pull her outside of it. Therefore, also, she's pretty kind of tied to a ball and chain next to someone like Escoffier. Now, I know that technically you can use characters like this outside of it, but I still believe that, especially when we look at something like the Abyss, the damage numbers are great, don't get me wrong. In overworld content, you're probably not going to need Escoffier and Farina and all this other stuff. But I still do think that once you get into endgame content, the harder things, I do think that it is going to be necessary to actually, if you grab Skirk now and you don't have these pieces, that's something that you need to focus on getting in the future. Now, Can it work in the meantime? Sure. And can you do some other things to make it, just useful now and actually make her a good DPS? Definitely. She is a character that doesn't focus on melt reactions and all this other stuff, so there's kind of some difference in how her modifiers might be different than some other characters, but that's how at least I feel about Skirk specifically. Looking at Shenhe, though, on the other side, I think that, by the way, Skirk does have good value as a character, but looking at Shenhe, it's not that I don't think Shenhe has good value. I think you have to have already a lot on your account to make Shenhe valuable. You have to already have a lot of good and built cryo characters, and specifically DPSs. If you're going after Skirk, if you already have characters like a Wriothesley or Ayaka, without these things, that's all that really Shenhe's doing. And I know, once again, we can talk more about the teams later, but honestly, for what she does, she wants to focus a lot in those cryo-specific teams, and so therefore, she needs a cryo DPS to kind of boost forward. At that same point, a character like Escoffier, a character like Farina, a character like Shilonen, all these other characters that are maybe good buffers and solid in that aspect are going to be better for other DPSs rather than getting Shenhe. She's a very premium support that you have once you've built already and pulled a lot on the account. More for veteran take, in my personal opinion. So the value is very good from Shenhe, but it's not something that she's going to be exceptional in anymore. I also think that in the future, we might get a character that is possibly going to power creep her, not necessarily doing what she does, but better, but just maybe doing things differently in the sense, because we are getting into Nodcry, so that's just at least how I feel. I don't know about you, Rift. How do you feel about these two characters and their actual value?
Yeah, well, with Skirk, I definitely do think, and I do have the opinion that she may not be necessary. If you, especially like if you already have Ayaka or Wriothesley, she is a cryo DPS, and yes, I know that she's obviously better. Okay, I'm not going to discredit that because that's just fact. Like, Skirk is going to be much better than Ayaka and Wriothesley on paper, just in really any team comparison. But if you do already have Ayaka or Wriothesley, or even Ganyu, I don't want to leave other characters out, but my point is, you have these older characters and you also have Farina Escoffier as a dynamic, using Ayaka with Farina Escoffier is going to be very powerful. And so you've probably seen like Ayaka, Ganyu, and Wriothesley kind of move up in tier lists recently because of Escoffier. Escoffier has kind of changed how we look at those characters because she's heavily buffed those characters. So what I'm saying is, and this only applies, by the way, if you have Escoffier, because if you don't have Escoffier, then it's just as it was before, like that, So this is if you have Escoffier, then that kind of gives you the free ticket to not pull if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for an excuse to not pull, and you have Escoffier and an older cryo DPS, then that's kind of like, yeah, I can skip safely and maybe get her on a rerun if you change your mind or something like that. So if you want to be more cautious, you technically already have your cryo DPS, you have the best support in the game for cryo teams, being Escoffier, then I think you're good. Other than that, though, yeah, she is going to be better. I think it's easy when it comes to Skirk. You either really, really want her, or you can look for reasons to not get her, because she's going to be like the second best DPS in the game. Like, on paper, the only team better than Skirk's best team is Mawika's best melt team, and I guess that kind of makes sense. But Skirk gets really close to it based on what we've seen in speculations and theory crafting. We're not theory crafters ourselves, but that's just what we've seen. So, like, she's going to be good. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of value there because she's going to be one of the top meta characters. And even without, like you said, if you don't have a Escoffier, I don't think, and you still want Skirk, kind of like on the other side of the coin, if you still really want Skirk and you don't have a Escoffier, that doesn't mean, oh, don't pull Skirk, you don't have a Escoffier. You can still totally get Skirk because even without a Escoffier, she can just put out a lot of damage. And if you still have like Farina or these other supports, Yelan, Sitlali, Shenhe, that team's still outputting a lot of damage, and you can just look forward to getting a Escoffier on her first rerun. Now,
Right.
looking at Shenhe, like you said, a luxury kind of unit, not really too worth it unless you already have a cryo DPS or you really are planning to get Skirk here maybe. Other than it's really hard to push for recommending her when you don't even have those things. So, like you said, luxury unit, go after it. At the same time, though, I don't think she's required for your Wriothesley, for your Skirk,
Mm-hmm.
Ayaka, etc. There are other options that can still be used in the place of Shenhe if you're, once again, just looking for an excuse not to get or use. You can totally use Yelan or Sitlali as like those really close second places over Shenhe. Shenhe being first place for Skirk, let's just say. But Yelan and Sitlali come awfully close. Yelan's a lot of her own personal damage. She does have that buff in her passive. Sitlali allows you to have a scroll user in the team, which is another form of a buff. The shielding is nice. So there's different ways to go about it. And regardless, if you already have Farina Escoffier, whatever that 4 slot is, frankly, you're going to be fine, because that could even be Dahlia, Layla, any other 4-star Cryo or Hydro characters. So value-wise, it's there, but I don't know that I would personally recommend Shenhe to most people.
Yeah, I agree. I think over time, Skirk obviously on this banner has way more value, but like you said, I think it was a very good way to say it. You do have other cryo DPSs that can still take up that fight for you instead, and so it's not to say that Skirk's bad. It just means that for right now, you do have other options. If you already have those options, those are still good options for now. At the same time, if you have to look at value in a character, she still has very good value and is probably going to be a very integral part of the beginning of Nodcry in the next little while we have things. Definitely going to help you in Abyss because it's probably going to be leaning towards her. But do keep in mind that, that does go away at some point as well. And the next new thing is also going to be here as well. So once again, we are going into a cryo region. So keep that in mind with both these characters kind of in the back of your mind while you're looking at pulling for these characters. Now looking at the next question we have is, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? Now, looking at this question, we've already kind of talked about it a lot at this point. Both of these characters are practically stuck to the freeze idea. Looking at Cryo and Hydro units, Skirk has a lot of extra things in her kit. We talked about Reason Beyond Reason, that passive talent. There's another passive talent that also is kind of like giving extra buffs based on Cryo and Hydro hits from other opponents or other characters in the team. By doing those hits, that gives you another buff. She has a lot in her kit that is focused on Cryo and Hydro specific damage. Now, it's not like Chevreuse or like Escoffier where the team only has to have Cryo and Hydro units, but it's also kind of built that way, yes. So there is nothing initially in the kit that specifically says only Cryo and Hydro units have to be in the team for her to do good damage, but it does it in a different way. So one of the passive talents that she has, it's the one that we didn't talk about initially with her, is Return to Oblivion. This specific one gives a Death Crossing stack whenever you hit an opponent with, whether that's Skirk or any other nearby Hydro or Cryo party member. If they hit an opponent, this is going to give Skirk a Death Crossing stack. Now, one of those stacks gives while you're in your 7-phase flash mode, those normal attacks that you do, the damage is going to be increased based on each stack that you have. So one stack gives you 110%, the 2 stacks gives 120, and 3 stacks is 170. So a big jump in that 3rd stack. So now you can see that you need all Hydro, all Cryo, or a mix of both to actually get the huge damage bonus that you have. Never mind talking about the elemental burst buffs that you also get here as well. So it doesn't initially or basically really state you can only have those characters in the team, but it kind of inadvertently tells you only have Cryo and Hydro party members in the team. Now, I know some people are still going to talk about, can I still throw, Shilonen in there? I don't have another character I want to use. Yes, you can, but just keep in mind, you're going from a 170% normal attack damage bonus to 120%. And then your elemental burst, I think, is going like from a 116 or 160 to a 115. So keep in mind that those are pretty substantial buffs that you are losing. But at the same time, she still just focuses in that freeze aspect, but I'm sure there are going to be people that try to run her outside of it. That's at least how Skirk is going to be looking. Shenhe, on the other hand, I've used Shenhe in melt teams before with Risley. I've used her originally with my Ayaka to kind of help her kind of stay useful. I originally actually got her for Eula, which I know sounds stupid, but she has a physical resistance in her kit as well, and technically that can also be a thing that you focus on too, whether you are a Razor main or a Eula main. Technically that helps. The double Cryo is another character that can also help with that, so it just kind of depends what you want to do with Shenhe, but honestly, she does focus in mainly helping Cryo characters. So those hits, she does have that trigger quota like Rift was talking about earlier. She focuses a lot more in helping the cryo DPS with the cryo resistance shred. But at the same time, she's more or less, as long as she's attached to a cryo character, that's all that really matters. So that's at least how I look at the teams when I see Shenhe and when I see Skirk as well.
Yeah, for me, when it comes to teams, like I'll just bounce off of Shenhe because that's where you left off. Um, I once again, because I can't recommend Shenhe to most players because of how incredibly niche she is and also how many other good options over her there are. Um, like really for me, if I was looking at Shenhe, this is for me, okay? I would really only be thinking about those cryo DPSs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Skirk here. My Risley. I don't have Ayaka, but I do have Risley, so that's all I can think about. And even so, I'm like, I don't know. I can live without it. I'll just use Yelan. I'll just use Sitlali because I have both of those characters. Once again, it's kind of going back to value, but that's my opinion on teams with Shenhe. She's the premium support for those cryo characters, like you were talking about. And then with Skirk for teams, everyone knows it at this point, but like, okay, Farina Scoffier for that dynamic duo, there's literally nothing better than that. You have to use that. Well, you don't have to, but you get my drift. And then if there is a character in that last slot, it would be Shenhe on paper. So if you want, and you know, to make sure you're getting the best, absolute best team for Skirk, then yes, it is going to be Shenhe, and that'll be the same for Risley Freeze with Farina Scoffier Shenhe, Ayaka, Farina Scoffier Shenhe. That's the best on paper. But if you don't have that Shenhe, Yelan and Sitlali would be the second best there. And even if you don't have those characters, at that point, like in Skirk's case, really any Hydro or Cryo unit is going to be just fine. You can use Dahlia if you happen to get him and you want to build him up because you like Dahlia. The attack speed is technically helping. It's not that much because Dahlia is kind of just a sad excuse of a character, if we're being honest, but still can use that because Skirk, Farina, Scoffier by themselves is already ridiculously powerful. You can use Xing Cho if you just want a Hydro unit there. You can use Layla, has a pretty comfortable shield. Diona if you want. Like, because Skirk is just so powerful, like many different options work there. As long as you're like keeping it a Hydro or Cryo for the most part, that's going to be helping her personal damage, like Vixen was talking about with those passive talents. So that's kind of my opinion with the teams for Skirk and Shenhe.
Yeah, she's going back to that same thing. She's the most restrictive, flexible unit. That fourth slot can just
Yeah.
kind of be anything, but it's restrictive in the fact that you kind of really want the other two characters, but also you kind of stick in that Hydro Cryo, so it inadvertently kind of forces
Right.
you into a freeze team. Looking at the next question we have, though, is looking at these specific weapons. Do you actually need the weapons? So looking at these specific weapons kind of by themselves, looking at Skirk's weapon, Azure Light, it states at level 90 you have 674 basic attack, which crit rate at 22.1% at level 90. The ability at R1 states that within 12 seconds after using an elemental skill, attack is then increased by 24%. During this time period as well, when the equipping character has 0 energy, attack will be further increased by 24% to a 48% attack increase, and crit damage will be increased by 40%. Now you can kind of see a little bit more why this specific unit is so good for her, obviously her specific character. Now, I think overall, using it, obviously it's going to be Skirk's best weapon. The double attack increase and the basis on 0 energy, also with the idea of 40% more crit damage. So you have 22% crit rate in the main stat, 40% crit damage in the substat, in the refinement ability, if you will. Just goes to show this is a very good weapon for her. Now, at the same time, I do want everyone to keep in mind that this is focusing on, yes, this can be a just weapon to throw on anyone. So if you accidentally lose to this weapon, it can go on some other characters who just want the main stat, right? So this is kind of just a stat stick for other characters. So if you accidentally lose to this weapon to another thing, this could just be a stat stick, whether it be the high base attack, whether it be the crit rate, whether it be the initial ability with getting some extra attack after using a skill, totally fine. But keep in mind, every single other sword user has an energy mechanic, meaning they are most likely not always going to be at 0 energy. And if they are at 0 energy, it is going to be very quick where they immediately lose being at 0 energy. So that's kind of the issue with actually using this on a lot of other characters, is you lose that extra 24% attack and the extra 40% crit damage, making this weapon kind of extremely hard to use on other characters because of the energy mechanic here. Now, Skirk obviously doesn't have energy, so it makes her life 10 times easier, but that is the idea here. Never mind, looking at the weapon itself, it's obviously very connected to her. That's at least how I see the specific weapon, though. But Rift, what are you thinking, at least?
Yeah, well, honestly, I think you put all of it pretty well. The one exclusive thing that came to my mind is this is yet another option to just have for your Bennett because of the high base attack, right? If you don't already have Miss Splitter, if you don't already have
True.
Aquila, then hey, if you do happen to get this and your Bennett needs that, then that's technically an upgrade. So that's not really a loss, if we're being honest, because now your Bennett's going to be giving more attack than he was before if you didn't already have Aquila or Miss Splitter. So if you already have those,
Damage
then
Bennett it
well, I
is.
guess it is a loss. But yeah, it is funny because like you would be giving him a lot more crit rate too, so maybe more burst that crit, because when Bennett crits with that burst, it's like
Yeah.
a whopping 50 or 60k out of nowhere, and you're just kind of like, hey, what? Like,
Yep.
you're a support. What are you doing? I built you on HP. What's going on here? But just on a serious note, high base attack, you can throw that on Bennett if you don't have the 674 base attack from another 5-star. So that's an upgrade. Can't get around that. But looking at Shenhe's weapon, Calamity Queller, at level 90, you're going to have a base attack of 741 with an attack main stat sitting at 16.5%. So a lot of attack, and that makes sense because Shenhe's using her attack to buff characters. Looking at the ability on this at R1, you're going to gain 12% all elemental damage bonus, and you're going to obtain consummation for 20 seconds after using an elemental skill, causing attack to increase by 3.2% per second. This attack increase has a maximum of 6 stacks. When the equipping character is not on the field, then consummation's attack increase is doubled. So just a lot of attack. Once again, makes sense for Shenhe, but honestly, I kind of wanted to talk about other characters that this can be used on. If you happen to get this weapon, maybe because you're going after Skirk's weapon, you went for Skirk, because I feel like a majority of people are going to be going after Skirk over Shenhe, obviously. I feel like that's kind of a no-brainer. And are also going to be, if they're looking at the weapon banner, trying to get Skirk's weapon. And so as a result, there's going to be quite a handful, I'd say, of people that end up with Calamity Queller, but no Shenhe, or
Yeah.
maybe they already had it and have a second, now they're getting a second copy. So the other characters, there are 3 really good characters you can use this on. Of course, there are a lot more than this, but my top 3 are definitely going to be Jansan, Escoffier, and also Emily. If you don't have Escoffier's personal, if you don't have Emily's personal, this is a really good stat stick just because of the really high attack that this weapon has. We all know that Escoffier, she's dealing a lot of good damage based on attack, of course, but also is healing on her attack, so this is really good. You get the 12% all elemental damage bonus, which likewise for Emily, that is helping her dendro damage, but also all of that attack. She's an attack scaler as well. Really good for those 2 characters if you don't have their signature weapons. But also, Jansan. Jansan can really use this because, once again, she's using her attack to buff characters, and this helps you get to that threshold that Jansan wants, which is somewhere around 2,500 if you have the burst crowned. This really helps you get there and can even allow you to safely or more comfortably run maybe like an ER Sands if you just need the energy because it's important that you use her burst, or maybe you don't have ER problems, you can run a crit rate circlet so you have some damage potential. It just makes the build easier, and also you are getting some damage bonus once again. Jansan's damage is honestly not that negligible. So I don't know, Vixen, what are some of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree. I think my initial thought, and back then when they when her weapon came out, she was kind of the only one that really wanted it. But outside of this use, once again, it's based off of a lot of elemental skills. So as soon as Emily came out, this became something that she could use. I think she was the number 1 option, kind of the only other option. I know technically you could throw it on other characters, but she was the best option at that time period. And then, like you said, as soon as Escoffier and Jansan came out, it became very good options for them. You still want to use Jansan's skill a lot. She's a lot based off of her own personal attack, giving buffs because of it. And then obviously Escoffier is all about off field while also having the damage. So all 3 of those characters can use the full range of the specific weapon, which just makes it actually very useful for them. Outside of that, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Yeah, you could use characters like Rosaria, or I don't know, some other character that's just going to be kind of using it like Chongling because of Guoba, but once again, like you said, the other 3 characters just use it that much better, and it fits better with their kits than the others that you might be looking at.
We hope that this video could help you decide on whether or not these characters or even their weapons coming up on this next banner are for you. As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.